When I get to the Newsmaker Hotline, say good morning to Congressman Scott DesJarlais. And Congressman, always great to have you on. So tomorrow, I believe, is the official day where you folks return from August recess. Are you in D.C. or are you here in Tennessee?
I am still in Tennessee. We'll head up there tomorrow.
So let's talk about what the priorities are. I know that there's a couple of things. Of course, one, you folks are going to be talking about spending, also impeachment inquiry. So let's start with the spending, though, because, it seems like you've got, still, it feels like been the story of the Republican Party, especially the last several years. You have the hardliners who want to, of course, limit spending and bring it back to, if I'm not mistaken, is it 2022 levels? And there's this fight over appropriations. And then you have, Kevin McCarthy, who is a little more moderate, looking for compromise and so forth. How big of a battle is this going to be? Because, of course, everyone's talking about yet another government shutdown.
Right. I think it's going to be more of a messaging battle. And as you said, for over a decade, really, we've not passed the budget. And, being one of the hardline conservatives, I want to see some reduction in spending. I'd like to, at the very least, see us go back to 2022. A clean CR or continuing resolution basically just continues to spend at the current rate. I would be in the camp that we need to do something at the southern border that's driving an incredible amount of expense on our country. I just saw Secretary Mayorkas being interviewed on CNN, and they were talking about New York and, being a sanctuary city, how Mayor Adams said that the city's being overrun, is going to be destroyed. And they continue to shift it back to Congress that we need to act and do comprehensive immigration reform. But bottom line is there's laws on the books we're not following, and we got to plug these holes. So that's driving a lot of the spending. So to get me to vote for a continuing resolution, we'd have to have something concrete in there, like shutting down the border once and for all and addressing that problem directly.
It's so frustrating whenever I hear either Mayorkas or Karine Jean-Pierre or some of these folks say that, Congress hasn't done anything. Well, the Republicans in the House have. And you folks passed, if I remember correctly, you guys passed an entire set of bills, legislation that would do more to protect the border, but it died in the Senate.
Yeah, Congress working together from a liberal perspective means pathway to citizenship and amnesty as they continue to let the borders flow free. We want to stop the influx in the border. We want to make sure we know who's coming to this country, that they won't be a public charge, that they can contribute. All countries take their share of refugees. We take an inordinate amount compared to other countries. And, the cost now per immigrant that's coming here illegally can be up to $80,000 per person because they're getting food, shelter, education, cell phones, housing, everything that we have to pay for as Americans. We got millions and millions of people coming in that are draining and putting a strain on our system. And so that is an inherent threat. We talk about China and Russia, what's happening at the invasion of our southern border and even to some extent now our northern border has far-reaching implications in terms of cost. And so circling back around to the funding, that's what should be at the forefront is how we address that. But unfortunately, the Senate went back into session. Chuck Schumer and a couple moderate Republicans like Mitt Romney are trying to put appropriation bills to give them leverage, but ultimately they have the White House, they have the Senate. So, I think as Republicans and a conservative Republican like myself, we want to show the American people how it would be under Republican rule, and I hope we get that opportunity in 2024 after the November elections.
22 years since 9/11. We know that there have been people that have come across our southern border on the terrorist watch list. Afghanistan remains, of course, now a mess since the epically failed pullout. Congressman Scott DesJarlais, do you believe that we are safer now than we were 22 years ago?
No, I mean, clearly we're not. We don't have mechanisms in place to stop terrorists from entering our country. From a classified side, we've been following a number of people who've entered the country, and even Homeland Security and others suspect that we'll see some type of attack, within the next 6 months. I hope that that's wrong, but we're having a harder and harder time. Now, we haven't had another major attack in 20 years, so, perhaps we're doing something right, or perhaps, we're just waiting for the inevitable. But, no, I don't feel safer, and I feel like the recruiting problems in our military and the issues with wokeism and DEI are continuing to destroy the fiber of our military, and our enemies around the world are taking notice.
Well, I mean, you've touched on so many different things, and I think that when Trump was in office, I think that before Biden came in and reversed a lot of his immigration policies, I think the argument could have been made that we were safer than we were in 2001. But really, since Biden took the oath of office, he eliminated a lot of the things that Donald Trump did, remain in Mexico and so forth. Of course, the construction of the border wall is over and done with, and we do have wide open borders. And so I think that during Trump, I think the argument could be made that we were safer. And of course, we know what he did with ISIS. But once Biden came in, he again reversed all of those things, and things have, in my opinion, gotten a lot worse. Are you hearing much about what is going on in Afghanistan as far as, of course, we know the Taliban took it over, but as far as it being sort of a terrorism training ground?
Oh, I mean, we worry about that, and they're partnering with the Chinese as we suspected they would. And so, the threat is definitely real, and it's there, and we're following that. We're following what's going on in Ukraine, China, Taiwan. There's, been a lot of activity in the Indo-PACOM region. The G20 summit was in India, and a lot of talks were going on in Hanoi, Vietnam. So it's definitely a hot spot in the world. I had the opportunity to visit Singapore, Hanoi, Japan, and Australia earlier this month, and it was fascinating to see how many of the countries that, especially like Vietnam, who is an arch enemy, seems to want to cozy up a little more with the United States right now because of the threat of China. And so, just pivoting back, when Trump was in office, there was a clear plan, there was a clear policy. He was addressing rogue leaders like Kim Jong-un in North Korea was a big threat. People forget about what a threat ISIS was when Trump took office. I mean, it was rampant in the Middle East, and he literally shut that down, within his first 6 months in office. So strong leadership makes a difference, and other leaders like President Xi and Putin and others pay attention to that, and Biden is anything but.
Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Congressman Scott DesJarlais is joining us, heading back to Washington, D.C. tomorrow, going back after the August recess, going to be talking about a number of different things. Most importantly, of course, I don't know what is more important. You've got all things as far as national security goes, the border. You also have, of course, the budget, appropriations bills, and so forth. Congressman, I've got to ask you regarding impeachment inquiries and the like. Of course, we all know that this has been a big topic of conversation. Kevin McCarthy has now floated the issue of an impeachment inquiry. Do you think that from what you're hearing right now, that it's going to happen, this impeachment inquiry? It seems to me like this is where it's going regarding Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and all the accusations of influence peddling and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, considering all the information that's come forward from whistleblowers and just the fact that even the liberal media is now acknowledging that things that were initially presented to the American people as false are now been proven true. So unlike the way the Democrats operated against President Trump with really two bogus impeachments, an impeachment inquiry simply allows us to gather facts that we wouldn't be able to otherwise do. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't move forward with impeachment inquiries on President Biden. Certainly Secretary Mayorkas is an absolute joke. Every time I listen to him, it's hard to even keep a straight face to hear the lies the guy spews. But President Biden, it appears to be compromised. Certainly Hunter Biden has been shielded, but will probably face some type of indictment right now. I think the left is souring on President Biden. You hear more and more, whether it's CNN or MSNBC, talking about his age and other things, kind of nibbling around the edges. I don't think they want Biden to be their nominee. We all know that he's not mentally capable to do the job. His age is a factor because he's in a clear decline and deterioration, and that's not something that we need from the leader of the free world. So specifically on the impeachment inquiry, I would be shocked if we don't move forward in that direction. It's the appropriate way to handle impeachment. Let's look at the facts, and if the evidence proves that the president is compromised and has committed high crimes and misdemeanors, then he needs to be removed. But let's do it the way it was designed to do, and not just a kangaroo court the way we saw the Democrats do with Trump. Wouldn't be surprised if the impeachment, at least on the Ukraine issue, the phone call to Ukraine, isn't reversed in the future, because and then of course he was impeached when he wasn't even president anymore. So
right.
It's become a political weapon, and we don't want to use it as that. we want to use it how it's intended, and the impeachment inquiry is the appropriate first step.
Let me ask you, the president, I don't know if you've seen the headlines this morning, Congressman, but the president had a rough night in Vietnam where he gave a speech and he was basically pulled off of the stage by his own staff. This is what it sounded like last night.
We talked about at the conference overall. We talked about stability. We talked about making sure that the Southern Hemisphere had access to change it, had access. It wasn't confrontational at all.
Thank you, everybody. This ends the count.
They literally pulled him off of the stage in the middle of, this rambling 26-minute, speech, question and answer. He wasn't doing really well. You touched on it regarding his mental acuity, clearly in decline. Is there anything from Chuck Todd on his show over the weekend, he talked about amending the Constitution, trying to add that there must be some sort of cognitive test for whether it's politicians or, presidents specifically. But what would you think about that?
Yeah, I introduced the bill months ago, and it didn't get a lot of attention. We got some that it required a cognitive function test for presidents, Supreme Court justices, members of Congress. Anybody that isn't in elected leadership should be able to pass like the Montreal cognitive test that Trump took. And, Nikki Haley has been talking about it. But, we're not immune either, because now you see Senator Mitch McConnell freezing up when he speaks. And so you got Dianne Feinstein, you've got Fetterman, who clearly isn't functioning, Biden, who can't, answer a question in any given press conference. Anytime he speaks, it's not a matter if he's going to screw up, it's just when and how bad. And so, I don't know why we shouldn't have that in place. And I'll continue to push my legislation, and hopefully between myself, Nikki Haley, and others, we'll get something in place to protect the American people. But if Mitch McConnell can't finish a sentence in a press conference or even speak, then we've got some serious problems, because these are the highest members of leadership, and except for Fetterman, but the others, play important roles on committees and other areas. So I absolutely think that there's no shame in doing that. If you're not mentally capable of doing the job, you shouldn't be in it.
And it's bipartisan. I mean, whether it's Mitch McConnell or Dianne Feinstein or Joe Biden or whoever, I mean, you're right. These are the people at the highest levels of government, and so they do need to, my opinion, take those cognitive tests and be held accountable. Congressman Scott DesJarlais, of course, heading back to Washington, D.C. Anything else on your radar that folks here in Middle Tennessee need to be aware of?
There's a lot on the plate. The next 3 weeks will be very busy. There will be a lot of arguments over appropriations and funding. And sadly, there's probably not a bill that we can pass with just Republicans out of the House that most of us could vote for, because if we have significant, meaningful amendments to appropriations bill that would fix some of our current problems, the Senate would reject them. The Senate's been there for a week. They're trying to pass their appropriation bills. So what I'm fearful is we're going to see a bill pass through the House with 120 Republicans and the rest Democrats. And then, you're going to end up with some kind of an extension. But, this has happened year after year, and that's the problem. We sit there and watch the debt clock rise just year after year, and nobody takes this seriously. But it is a huge problem, and it's dragging down the stability and security of our country. And at some point, Americans across the country need to step up and elect leaders that are willing to address the problem seriously. And so I'm thinking by the end of September, you're going to see some type of a continuing resolution. The spending's going to continue. It's really going to come up to next year. We just don't have enough conservative Republicans in the House to pass meaningful legislation, and we did not take control of the Senate. So, I'm prepared to be disappointed that it's not going to be enough to make a difference, but we have to keep fighting.
723 on Nashville's Morning News. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us here on Super Talk 99.7. Have a safe trip back to D.C.